Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And this episode is for everybody who's on a healing journey. It doesn't matter what you're dealing with, how long you've had it, but I also want to just shout out to our chronic illness friends, because I think those journeys are particularly slow and particularly challenging and particularly convoluted. And we really wanted to talk today about how to tell that your body is actually healing, even if your symptoms aren't gone yet or you don't necessarily feel like anything's changed. Because, and I've been there personally too, actually thinking, oh, things aren't any different. But sometimes you've got to know what to look for as confirmation you're on the right path and that you should stick with what you're doing. It's just really more a matter of time and consistency. And that's because unlike perhaps accidents, for example, most health conditions don't come at the flip of a switch. They don't happen in a moment. They happen as a war of attrition, if you like, over time. And when it comes to reversing out of an illness or a condition, the same journey has to be undertaken, and the speed at which that journey takes really depends on so many factors. And I think it can be so disheartening when you're unwell and feeling like you're not getting anywhere. But if you know what to look for, you might actually see that you have come a long way already. And so this is really touching on things that we might hear in clinic, or we definitely do hear in clinic sometimes. And that is, I'm doing all the right things, but I'm not getting better. And this might be someone who's landed in our clinic, who's maybe been doing a lot of things either with another practitioner or maybe just on their own, or they might have been working with us for a period of time and are feeling like, oh, I still feel unwell. And it's not until you actually reflect on these other things you realize actually how much has improved. It's so easy to focus on what's still present and not necessarily what's gone. So please remember that healing doesn't mean becoming symptom-free overnight. And often symptoms can be the last thing to shift, and there are green flags along the journey that can tell us or indicate to us that we're actually on the right track. So first of all, with symptoms, I will say it is really important to track that, and as clinicians, we do that for our clients. I'm just thinking of one client with an autoimmune disease, and she was waking up with headaches all the time and would have to have an afternoon nap all the time. And, I remember a few months in, she was like, oh, I'm still getting headaches and often need a nap. But then when we dug a little bit deeper, she wasn't waking up with a headache every day. It was maybe a couple of times a week. And same with the naps as well. And we're actually able to track on the days she needed that, what was actually influencing that. And so for her, totally understandable, by the way, she was very focused on the fact that she was still getting headaches and she was still needing to take pain meds for that. And then she was still having to sometimes cancel plans and have a nap because her goal is to be headache free and have plenty of energy. But when we quantified that piece, actually a huge change had happened and she was maybe 85, 90% of the way there. So definitely tracking it's important, and having that on the radar is important. But our body has to go on a journey to regulate itself, and looking for signs of regulation and healing outside of symptoms are really important. And the last thing I'll say, and I feel like I want to point the finger at shows like The Biggest Loser or makeover shows or health boot camps. Outside of that, even outside of that, we are trained for instant gratification. We want instant results. We love a quick win story, and we want to be that person who finds a silver bullet and fixes things overnight. And unfortunately, the sad, annoying truth, which we did touch on the things we'd love to tell you without, if we didn't want to hurt your feelings, is that the body, it's the inconsistent, boring things that shift the needle, and the body prioritizes safety before symptom resolution, and creating that sense of safety and consistency in the body is really, really important. So following the other signs of healing and nervous system regulation is really key. So Nat, do you want to share with our listeners what the first one is?
Yes. So I would say energy stability before necessarily energy levels increasing overall is a pattern that I see a lot in clinic. I think that a lot of people want more energy, and that's what we hear a lot from clients. Often it's a byproduct of other, or it's amongst other things that they want as well. And it's totally valid. And I also think patience with that journey is important. And again, as you said, like the nuance of observing the changes that are subtle and not ignoring the things that are patterns that are changing, even if the whole issue isn't completely reversed. And energy is a really good one. So yeah, energy stability. So it might be that you're getting fewer crashes in the day, or that you might feel like, sure, I still feel a little bit tired in the afternoon, but it takes me a lot longer to get to that point. Or the reverse might be true. It might be that previously you were feeling like really tired in the morning, but now you're actually waking up with a little bit more energy. So I think that's important to notice. And also you might notice that the peaks and troughs, or more so like those troughs of energy within the day, the lows aren't as low. So it might be that you need to stop and rest, but you don't need to take a nap. Or it might be that you still need to structure a day in a way that front loads the tasks that require more from you, but you still are able to get through some tasks in the afternoon. So it's that kind of nuance that I think happens. And that's for a number of reasons. Blood sugar regulation starts to improve, so that energy stability is often something that comes back first. I also think that as your adrenals or your nervous system starts to repair, again, that regulation happens before an increase. And so that stability aspect is coming in. And also it's important to know that recovering your mitochondrial health, so mitochondria being the energy producing cells of your body, it takes time. And something I always remind people of is you haven't come often to us with this issue because you've been suffering from it for a month. Usually it's months, years, sometimes decades. And I really want to validate the fact that, of course, it's natural to want to feel better yesterday. And also it's really important for your own sanity that you realize that that's an unrealistic expectation, that something that's been an issue for years is going to turn around in even 2 months. Like, I think what we're looking for is change over time, as you said, rather than something that is just a switch that's been flicked. And of course it's hard because what we're sold online is also the quick fixes. That's what people are sharing. But as two experienced practitioners that have been practicing collectively for
50 years.
Yeah,
probably.
something outrageous.
45.
Like over 40, maybe 45 years. They are the exception. They're not the rule. The main process that we see is healing is not linear, and it's gradual, and it creeps up on you, and you go really well for a period and then you might have a wobble. Or the other thing I would say is often the things you want to change the most don't always change first, but don't ignore the things that are changing just because the one that you want to change the most hasn't changed yet. And it's not that you ignoring that is going to mean that you're somehow not focusing on it, so it won't be an outcome that happens. It's just going to actually have you feel more positive, motivated, and reassured that your body is on that trajectory and that you do need to trust that there's a wisdom to that in your body.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And that makes me think of the next thing I wanted to say about that too, and that is you're having better recovery after bad days. And that can look any number of ways. And I'm thinking back to my mold journey actually, when I was deep in it and chronically fatigued, a mold exposure might put me in bed for a week. And then as I was improving, I would have a mold exposure and I'd go down with a migraine and extreme fibro pain and all of the other symptoms, but I might be knocked out that day and the next, but by day 3 I was back on my feet. And then it knocked me out for that day, but I was fine the next day. So my recovery was so much quicker. And if you're on a different journey, it might look like, you know, your recovery after heavy days at the gym are easier. Or if you're on a gut healing journey and you accidentally get glutened, instead of suffering for days, you might just feel uncomfortable for a few hours. So it's not that you're not having any bad days or any sort of negative response to the things that might necessarily trigger you, but the response either A, isn't as bad, or B, doesn't last as long. So, you know, inflammation is settling faster, and ultimately what it's showing is more, I guess, cellular or physiological resilience, and really just it's a reflection of the capacity you've built on the way with healing. Your body has more resources internally to address anything that's a trigger, whether that's, you know, psychological stress or a physiological food antigen or an environmental toxin, for example. So I think that's a really important thing to look out for on the journey too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that capacity piece, and that the wobbles become either less wobbly in their intensity or the journey back to a state of stability in all those aspects is a lot shorter. And I really think that's something to celebrate. And I also say, you made me think of it when you said the gut stuff, is sometimes I say to my clients that I think it's a good thing that at some point most people, quote unquote, slip up or go YOLO, because it really gives us a bit of an indicator of where they're at in their journey. And often what gets mirrored back to me or said back to me from clients, provided we're fairly decently into the gut healing journey, they do that. And they're like, so I did this thing and I had this XYZ food that I, quote unquote, no, I'm not supposed to have. You can eat whatever you want. There's just consequences. And then they'll say, it actually wasn't as bad as I thought. I actually felt okay. Do you think I could have that again?
Oh, amazing. Yes.
And yeah, so I really, I think that's just, yeah, it's definitely a common thread. The other thing I would say is that another sign or observation you might notice in your body is that sleep depth or the quality of your sleep actually shifts before the duration of it changes. So if part of your journey is working on sleep, you might notice, so for example, maybe you're only sleeping 5 hours or 6 hours, just something that's not quite fully cooked. 7 to 9 hours is probably a little bit better. You might notice that at first you don't necessarily achieve the increase in time in bed or in an actual sleep, but the quality of it improves, or even, you know, you might realize that how you feel after that sleep is better. And again, I think that might feel like feeling more rested on the same amount of hours that you were previously getting. It might look like waking up less frequently through the night, which I get so excited about. It might look like better sleep data on your sleep tracking rings or apps if you're using those, although I don't really encourage people to use that as a primary way of measuring it. There's so many different ways that you can experience that, and it counts. It's not, yes, sleep hours are really important, but quality of sleep, there's no point getting 10 hours sleep if it's shit quality, or if you're waking up every hour, for example. Of course, there are seasons of life, like early motherhood, where that we're not speaking to that. That is a very defined season. And part of it is because as you heal or get further along that healing journey, your nervous system is really getting into a better place and a more regulated place. And that has positive flow-on effects to depth of sleep, quality of sleep, sleep cycles, being able to link sleep cycles, etc. And, you know, often those other flow-on effects to quantity can take a little bit more time. So celebrate that, celebrate the small wins. And I think you don't have to have a perfect sleep routine to be having improvements in the area of sleep. It just has to be better relative to what it was previously in any which way.
Yes, yeah, such a good point. It really, and of course, sleep's where you heal. So every improvement is a win. And again, it's not, a switch doesn't get flicked. It's not like you go from being a poor sleeper to an excellent sleeper overnight. This is part of the journey. And I'll say also, so is emotional resilience. Now, this may or may not be relevant to you. I know for some clients, the physical journey doesn't necessarily have an emotional component to it, but more often than not, it does. It sucks to feel sick, or it sucks to have, hormones playing up, or your skin playing up, or whatever it is, or the impact of the symptoms, for example, like with IBS affecting you emotionally. But whenever we are compromised in any way, our emotional sensitivity naturally increases. It's a protective mechanism from the body. But what that can mean is we can become quite sensitive, quite reactive, easily overwhelmed. I'm looking at myself at the moment. But conversely, as your capacity builds and your cells are healing, you might notice that you're less emotionally reactive. Things that might trigger you don't anymore, or you just feel less bothered. You give less fucks about things from a place of I don't feel like I need to give this my energy, rather than I'm just deliberately not going to. And a tolerance to stress is built in a way that perhaps you hadn't experienced for a while. I think that's really important to look out for. I always know I'm really underslept if I start getting annoyed by slow walkers in front of me.
Oh, yes.
If I start getting irritated by it, I'm like, I haven't had enough sleep, because otherwise it just, yes, I walk faster, but it wouldn't get under my skin. So that's definitely one of my tells. So is catastrophizing things.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
My brain just makes up the worst scenarios for funsies, and that happens when I'm underslept or stressed and tired, and obviously unwell can be part of that too. So be very clear that if you're noticing any of those lovely subtle improvements, that is a sign that there is better, nervous system regulation. Your vagus nerve is more flexible, and your neuroendocrine system, your adrenals and hormones are responding in a more kind way. And so, ultimately, if you're noticing your emotions are more regulated, that means your physiology and what's going on for you is also improving underneath.
Yes, which we love. And I think the other thing sometimes people notice is they're thinking about their symptoms less. You might be finding that your doctor Googling less, or there's less entries in ChatGPT about your body and what it means, or that you're just like doing less. Yeah, just it takes up less space for you in your head and in your actual literal time. And that's great, because we want that. It really can become a full-time job healing. And while I can relate to that as well, and that might be appropriate at certain stages, I do think it's something that subtly changes in the background. I do think that something else to just quickly touch on before we run out of time is that it is really important that if you find yourself symptom chasing or protocol hopping, that you do a little bit of a check. Sometimes that is driven by, I think the symptom chasing can be lack of a solid plan or support. And I think the protocol hopping can more be a sign of impatience or a lack of understanding or compassion or graciousness with how healing actually happens, which we've already touched on, so I won't go into. But if you know that about yourself in terms of you're hopping from one thing to the other, you're hyperfixating on one symptom, then another symptom, you feel very scattered and overwhelmed, it's really a good time to think about, okay, who do I need to pull into this space to be able to take away that overwhelm and head noise and paralysis by analysis feeling that I'm having, and also choosing that person wisely, but taking responsibility for your part in that process, which is trusting the process. And I don't mean that in an esoterical way or just a whim, like just, I don't mean that as an offhand comment of like, just trust the process. I mean, trust that your body has a process of healing and that isn't linear, that isn't quick often. But if you are in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing and you're taking responsibility and there's an open line of communication to be able to redirect or course correct, that you are going to be moving in that direction. And I think that's why tracking a lot of these subtle changes in symptoms is important, because when you do have those days that all people who are on a healing journey have, where like, oh, fuck, is this even working? I feel, I don't know, maybe I should try something else. You can look back on that diary or that tracking and go, oh no, I can see that there has been some changes. I'm having a day of feeling like I really wish it was happening faster. And that's fine and valid and understandable, and not a reason to give up or necessarily change.
Yes. Oh man, that's a truth bomb right there, isn't it? Look, I think overall these are really good guideposts for people. And just on the ChatGPT thing, I had one client that was tracking her symptoms in it and then was able to get like a weekly and a monthly summary.
In ChatGPT, tracking symptoms.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So starting a chat specifically for that. And this was to do with cycle symptoms, actually. So it could be worth using a tool like that. Because if you're writing, I mean, you can obviously write it down in your diary, but if you then see a practitioner a month later and they're trying to get like an overview, can be helpful just to have that collated. But ultimately, I think tracking your progress is important. Remembering that your body has its own hierarchy of needs, and the order in which your symptoms and things will heal is going to be on your body's own time and own terms, not necessarily the way that you'd like it to be, sadly enough. So making sure that you're also tracking like non-symptom markers, so energy stability, stress recovery time, your sleep quality, whether it's duration or how much energy you wake up with, your emotional sensitivity or ability to tolerate stress, and your capacity to cope with life. Like looking at those things would be also really important. And just remembering that even though your symptoms aren't fixed yet, quiet progress is still progress. If your symptoms are less pronounced or less frequent, green flag. Even if you're not feeling amazing yet, but you're feeling these really slow, steady, incremental improvements, green flag that you're on the right track. And even though you might be really frustrated with the speed at which everything's happening, but your function is still improving, as in things are incrementally better, or you're noticing you're incrementally less sensitive to triggers, green flag that you're on the right track. So Nat and I would both just like to really encourage you to be patient and trust the process in an embodied way, not in a whimsical way. And if you've been on a journey like this yourself and have any encouraging words to share with our listeners, we'd love to hear from you too.
All right, on that note, we will see you again next week.
Bye, friends.